so much, and I would like to thank Director Jane Lee for inviting me and giving the opportunity to speak with all of you. The topic that we're going to be talking about is an amazing topic. It is a very trending topic, and it is a fundamental shift that is actually taking place. But before I get started, I want to talk a little about Toastmasters. My first experience with Toastmasters was about a month and a half ago, 2 months ago. I had a conference in Washington, D.C., and I was visiting, and China Lee invited me to our local chapter meeting of Toastmasters, which I accepted. I had an immensely enjoyable time at Toastmasters, that meeting, met a lot of people, very interesting group, but the warmth and the friendliness and the willingness to help everyone go through everything and then become more professionally, sound within their ability to communicate with each other, that was very, very impressive. So I was very impressed by this group. And so if you are on the fence saying, should I join Toastmasters or not, I would strongly suggest that you do join Toastmasters. With that being said, so this ChatGPT is what everyone knows this as. But ChatGPT actually stands for Chat Generative Pre-trained Transformers. So within that right there, there's quite a lot of information that you are actually being shown. So first of all, it is some sort of a chatbot. So it is a bot where you can actually talk to, and then it will actually respond in natural language to you. The next part, the GPT part, the generative, means that it was actually designed to actually generate new responses. So it is specifically trained to generate a response based upon a set of cues, and then it's going to generate a word at a time to actually go through and generate the response. So that's the generative. So it was specifically designed to do that. It is pre-trained, meaning that it was actually pre-trained with tremendous amount of corpus. And the corpus basically is a lot of textual data, such as non-copyright books, Wikipedia, documents, financial disclosures, you name it. Anything they can kind of just grasp and pull without copyright issues, they were pulling these things in and having used during the training of it. And that's where the pre-training part comes into place. The transformer comes into place because that is the underlying architecture that is currently being used. So the transformers were first use of transformers occurred around 2018. So when transformers were introduced as an architectural way to deal with natural language processing, it transformed the research area of natural language processing. So just with that title, we have so much information, and I was struggling with how much technical information to put in and how much depth to go in and how much breadth to actually cover within this presentation. And that was the hardest part, because if you let me, I can talk to you for 10 hours straight about this stuff. There is so much in here, but I had to cut out, I had to lobotomize, I have to keep just what was, the most important and relevant to you. And hopefully I've done a good enough job to kind of organize that. So, evolution of natural language processing, or NLP. So you'll hear the term NLP, or natural language processing. So basically this field is where we have been working since the 1940s and 1950s, researchers in this area trying to get the computer to understand human language and the ability to converse in human language. So basically, the idea is, how do you encode human language into a computer so that the computer has an understanding of context and meaning of the computer language, right? So before 1993, it was basically done as a rule-based natural language processing. What that basically means is that we try to literally architect and state everything that human language actually means. We try to define it. We try to do parsing of grammatical rules, parts of speech, tenses and everything. We tried to write everything. And we realized that it was an amazingly complex thing. There's so much nuance, so much context, so much, interaction between the words that actually create to form sentences, the sentences that come together with other sentences to create speeches or whatever. And so, yes, amazing things were done during those times, but at the same time, it was very, very far from what it needed to be, right? Then in 1993 to 2019, for those periods, people started to say, well, instead of human beings trying to figure out how to do this, is there some mathematical way? Is there some other way that we can have the computer learn on its own, or actually discover things on its own, rather than having for us to actually write all specific instructions for everything? And so that's where statistical NLP came. And that was another big jump in capability. So once statistical NLP came in, what it allowed us to do was to take a lot of unstructured information like corpus from books and other type of things, and extract certain relationships that was almost impossible for human beings to actually sit there and write out, because we have to write out every single relationship, which means there would be hundreds of thousands, billions of those type of interactions. Okay. Then right around 2018, 2019, so basically around 2020 to present, we shifted into large language models. And this large language model, the LLM, is basically the technology that is driving ChatGPT and all the other types of language, natural language processing currently in the last 4 or 5 years. This shift was a huge shift. It was a huge shift in capability. It was a huge shift in technology, and it was a huge shift in capability to mimic human level understanding, or what seemed like human level understanding, and what a human level capability in developing natural language processing. Okay. So I wanted to introduce some really key components or key milestones in natural language processing. I felt that these would allow you to get a little, I'm not trying to get you to be an expert in natural language processing. I'm not trying to get you to be an AI engineer, but just to give you enough information to say, this is what's happening behind the scenes, underneath. And once you understand what's underneath, as I go through the more common examples, you'll have a better, I feel, a connection to the problem, and so therefore a deeper understanding. So word2vec was a statistical method that I was talking about. Was developed by a team led by Mikolov at Google in 2013. It basically uses something called word embedding with several hundred dimensions. So when we talk about graphs, like a Cartesian coordinate, right, we have 2 dimensions, X and Y. And when we talk about a 2-dimensional space, we have 3 dimensions, X, Y, and Z. And that we can describe 3-dimensional objects with that. Well, these words are placed into a dimension that is hundreds of dimensions big. So it is, visually, we can't visualize it. It's too hard for us to visualize. But a computer is an abstract thought process. So therefore, it can do 100 dimensions, 200 dimensions, 700 dimension vector space, and that it doesn't have any problem. And so by doing that, what you're doing is you're putting it into a very complex vector space. Just think about it as how you go from a line, which has 1 dimension, to a plane, which has 2 dimensions, and then to a space, which has 3 dimensions. And then now we're saying we're going from 3 dimensions to 700 dimensions. What does that look like? What is the complexity there? Well, it is very, very complex. So what it uses is a large corpus to extract frequency and location relationship between words. So basically, it looks at a book and takes in a sentence. And as it parses through the sentence, it looks at, hey, what words occur together often? And what words occur together close to each other? And so basically those 2 information primarily is used to figure out where in this 700 dimensional space this word basically belongs in. So it's actually putting words into these places. And what it's trying to do is trying to put words that occurs together, close to each other, in a similar position in this 700 dimensional space. Okay, so that's basically what this word embedding actually does. Okay, so it just takes a word, looks at, millions of occurrences of that words with other words in text, and then figures out, hey, what words does it happen together and how often does it happen? And based upon that, tries to put it into 700 dimensional space. So you can see now all the words are in this 700 dimensional space. When you do that and train it with a lot of text, what it does is it exhibits some amazing properties. It starts to understand semantics and syntactic relationships. Okay, so let's see what that actually means. So we talked about it being 700 dimensional space. So in order to visualize it, what we did was in this diagram is not to actually show you the full 700 dimensions, but reduced it back down into a 3-dimensional space. So let's just say, if we could kind of visualize it back into a 3-dimensional space, okay? So this is just for reference, for understanding. It really is not in a 3-dimensional space. It's like in a 700-dimensional space. So now, given that, if you look at the vector, the vector representation, the point location of the word woman, and the point location of the word man, and then the point location of the word queen and king, an amazing thing appears. What it appears is that the vector that goes from woman to man and queen to king, if you look at, you think about it and you draw a line between those 2 points, the 2 lines are almost parallel. Now, what that means is somehow this thing has figured out there is a relationship between woman and man. That same relationship exists between queen and king. Okay. So that is, and it has figured that out by itself. So no one's actually sat there and programmed this. So this is a fundamental thing. We're going, wow, how did this do that? Now, typically in the past, what you had to do was you had to sit there and write all this relationship with rules on a program. And the program would be huge and it would be very, very time consuming for a human being, to a point where it is practically impossible for human beings to write all these relationships out in rules. But this has actually figured it out on its own, okay? Now, another one is if you have big, small, and biggest, and the other part is hidden smallest, okay? What happens here is that it has that line again. If you go from big to biggest, small to smallest, that line is also almost parallel. And so this shows that there is a tremendous amount of relationships that it has already embedded within its vector space, the vector notation of the words that it's created. What does this give you? So once it's trained like this, you can do something like this, which is you can actually ask it questions. If I take king, I subtract man from it. So remember, it's just kind of like a Cartesian coordinate. So you can do point manipulation, point operations, right? You can subtract this point from that point. You can add points together and so forth. And it basically changes the point to a new point in the vector space. And so if you say king minus man plus woman, what does it equal? And the system comes back as queen. So now think about it. So I'm taking king, subtracting the man part from king and adding the woman part to king, and then you're supposed to end up with queen. So brother minus boy plus girl is equal to sister. So these are things that this system is able to do. So once we actually did this statistical way of looking at words and word representation, these type of semantic and syntactical relationship just comes out automatically. This was not programmed, this was discovered by the computer. And that is the beautiful and that is the powerful part of it, is because we can now leverage the speed and the power of the computer to figure things out on its own without having a human being sit there and type at a human speed, but instead we're going to let it discover at the computer speed. computers think billions times faster than human beings. Computers can do billion times faster than what humans can actually do, okay? Trillions times. And so we could leverage that to actually have the computer learn more and more and more deeply about the words and their relationship to each other, okay? So hopefully that tells you like the underlying math and the model underneath what's actually happening, okay? Limitations though. So even though this was amazing, once this method was developed and was used, it provided amazing capabilities in natural language processing. Stuff that we could never do was suddenly possible, okay? But even so, we saw that there were limitations. For example, because let's look at an example of financial bank and river bank, okay? The financial bank and river bank, the word bank is spelled exactly the same way. So therefore, within this word-to-vec, this statistical method, both word actually has the same representation. Well, right there, you can see, well, there's a problem right there because they actually mean something very different. How could you actually say that they actually represent the same thing? And that's why this particular system has trouble with sentences like, one can deposit money at the bank, the river bank was not clean. So it is extremely hard for this particular system to differentiate the context of the word bank and how the word bank was used differently, even though it is spelled that's exactly the same way, okay? So this creates ambiguity within the system, so therefore it has limitations of being able to do something like that. So then came BERT. BERT is bidirectional encoder representation from transformers. Okay, so this is a very big mouthful. It was developed by a team led by Devlin at Google, introduced transformers, and it introduced attention. So let's kind of parse that out a little bit, okay? So bidirectional. So up until this point, all of the sequencing was only one directional, meaning human beings would read from left to right. So that is one direction. We're only looking at relationship as how we read the words and they appear within the sentence left to right. So there we're looking at left to right direction. Here, when it says bidirectional, this system is looking both left to right and right to left. So it's looking at all relationship, whether it's going forwards or backwards, and looking at both direction at the same time. So encoder is basically very similar to what I talked about. It is trying to encode words in a similar way as I defined before, except it uses word piece encoding. And what that basically means is that it takes words apart, separates it into pieces of words, and encodes pieces of words and puts them together to actually create its words, okay? And then the representation from transformers. So transformers was a huge technological leap. So what it does is it introduced a very efficient way to analyze and process textual information. Before, we used something called LSTMs, and LSTM is something that's it's basically long short-term memory, LSTM. And so what it is a specialized neural network that allows it to look at sequences of information and infer information about that, okay? But here, but what that does is with the LSTM, it takes a lot of time for it to actually process things because it has to do it one word at a time in a sequential manner. So it really slowed things down. Whereas transformer, you're giving the whole sentence and saying process it at the same time. So it actually processes the whole thing in parallel. And so what that does, it allows the computers to process information, textual information, much, much more quickly, tremendously quickly. And so now we are not only just taking advantage of the speed of the computer, we're taking advantage of the parallel capability of a computer, putting two different processors right next to each other, putting 1,000 processors right next to each other, putting hundreds of thousands of processors right next to each other and having it processed through at the same time. So there you can see how something that could have taken years then suddenly becomes, you could actually do it in days, okay? So, but here, what they did was they derived vectors not just from the word itself, like word2vec, but from the word and the words around the words. It actually looked, so the vector of the word was actually different. So when you talk about the riverbank and financial bank, because of the word river next to the bank or financial next to the bank, it understood that this bank and this second bank is different. So the encoding for the word bank would be actually be different. It would not be the same in this case because it takes into account the words that is supplied with it and around the word itself. And so when you do that, it is able to now discern and disambiguate the riverbank and the financial bank. Okay. Now this becomes really crystal clear in this next example. Let's read this sentence. The animal didn't cross the street because it was too tired. The animal didn't cross the street because it was too wide. Notice that there is only a one-word difference in the sentence. However, human beings have no problems figuring out what it means. It is the same word. So how does a computer figure out what it means, right? Can it, if we can get to a point where a computer can figure out that it actually means animal in the first sentence, because you're referring to it being too tired, it almost seems like you have to know so much of information, right? You have to know that animals can get tired, but streets can't. You have to understand the meaning of the word tired. You have to understand sentence structure. So this, for you to actually parse this out for a human being, because we know language, we've spoken the language, it is obvious to us. However, for a computer, how do you actually code that? How do you make the computer understand something like that, right? So let's look at this. This is what the mapping that BERT actually creates with those two sentences, okay? So on the first sentence where it uses the word tired, you see that when you focus on the word it says the highest probability that it is connected to is animal. It actually knows that it actually refers to animals because of that one single word difference, tired. And this was not manually coded. No human beings interfered or, did anything to have it learn this. Instead, it derived this relationship from reading hundreds of thousands, millions, billions of text that it was provided with. So it's like this. So you're saying, well, how could a computer do that? Well, how does a human being do that? You know, do we sit there and first learn all of the vocabulary words that we're ever going to use, sit there and, memorize dictionary words? Well, we do to a certain degree, but no. We speak the language fairly quickly. By age 2, 3, we can converse fairly well. Okay. But during that time, did every parent sit their children down and have them, memorize through dictionary words and, vocabulary and all that stuff? No. But they have picked it up somehow. Not only that, they pick up grammar. They pick up structure. They pick up relationships such as it, an animal in this. They would actually understand when you say the animal didn't cross the street because it was too tired, that it was being referred to the animal. They figured it out. How did they figure it out? Because they were exposed to this language over and over in their head, and they start to form relationships automatically. And so what this is doing, what this is showing is that with this technology with transformers, this new language model mechanism, we are actually duplicating the capability to extract meaning and context of a natural language by just showing it examples everyday language, just like a human being. That is a very powerful transition from all the previous examples of how we try to tackle natural language, okay? And so here you can see on the second example, the animal didn't cross the street because it was too wide. So the wide is the only thing that's different. And notice that the it has the strongest correlation to the word street. So that is amazing that this is able to figure out a ambiguous pronoun, what that ambiguous pronoun refers to, right? And one of the things I tell my children is, you should, when you're trying to communicate, you should try to minimize the use of pronouns. Why? A lot of times when you speak, the pronouns become ambiguous because depending on how you interpret the sentence, how you speak, people might get confused as to what you mean by the use of the word pronoun, right? But here, that's what even human beings have trouble with pronouns, and yet this is able to discern that distinction. So it's able to remove that ambiguity out of that understanding. So hopefully you see the power behind what's actually being driven underneath. So language models, right? So in theory, you would need to know a lot about the world. So how do you get all those information into this thing? In practice, what we're actually doing is we're doing a probabilistic prediction. So let's say there's a sentence, for dinner I ate blank. So that red part, the pizza, is missing. So you're basically saying complete. Figure out the next word, okay? So what's in yellow is the previous words, is the context that's given to the language model. And then pizza is what you want the language model to kind of predict. So then what you're doing is probability of the full sentence is equal to probability of the word for happening times probability of the word dinner being chosen given that for was given. The probability I is chosen given that for dinner was given. And the probability that 8 happens if for dinner I was given. And so therefore now the final thing is the probability that pizza will happen given for dinner I ate was given. So basically, how do you gain, so where do you get the value for probability for the word for? Or probability for the word for dinner given for already happened? Well, if you read through a lot of text, which it does, what this thing was trained on, you would look at how often that combination occurred in text. And that's basically what is actually encoding. Okay, those probabilistic relationship between the words and the structure and the sequence of that. Okay, and so with this, we are seeing that you don't necessarily need the theory part, that you could actually automatically embody the theory somehow. Now, as to exactly how this works, the people who actually developed this don't know either, right? We know the mathematical model and we know that this is how the numbers come out. But why does that actually work at the most fundamental level is actually stuff that we're still trying to figure out, okay? So let's look at an example here, okay? So what's in black? So what's in black is what was prompted to the language model. When I found out my grandma was in the hospital, I felt a particular color. When someone cut me off in traffic, I felt a different color. What is the most likely color I would see if I combine these two colors? Wow. You have to actually know a lot about information, right? You have to know about information, being able to understand sentiment from this information in terms of like if your grandma is in the hospital, then you have to understand, hey, this is a sad occasion. There's a lot of things going on in here. I mean, if you give this to someone in elementary school, they might actually have problems with this. Can a computer actually figure something out like this? So here's a model output. It says the color that I felt when I found out my grandma was in the hospital was likely a sad color, like blue. The color that I felt when someone cut me off in traffic was likely an angry color, like red. So how did it know that someone being in a hospital is a sad occasion? How did it know that someone cutting you off in traffic is a angry situation, right? So it is inferring these things. And the way it's inferring is that when you see someone, the word cut me off in traffic, it happens a lot in descriptions of like road rage and various other things. And so therefore it's read a lot of those. And so then it's actually drawing in from those probabilities to basically come up with this type of thing. And then not only that, it says, if I combine these two colors, I would likely see purple. So the answer is purple. So it actually comes up with the purple. So then now this actually has to understand certain relationship of color combinations. So it saw in somewhere in its corpus, when people combine certain colors happen. So those would occur over and over again. So let's say textbooks in various different places. So it's drawing in from that reference, that probabilistic relationship that it has learned to actually come up with the word purple. So that is an amazing thing. That almost seems like it would require a human being to be able to do something like this, right? So let's see. So let's look at another example, okay? Michael is at that really famous museum in France, looking at its most famous painting. Okay, so right there, it is purposely being vague, right? The input being given to the computer, the language model is purposely being vague, right? So Michael is really famous museum. So famous museum is given as a description. Okay, most famous painting. However, the artist who made this painting just makes Michael think of his favorite cartoon character from his childhood. What was the country of origin of the thing that the cartoon character usually holds in his hands? Okay, so not which country it was from, not the character, but the object that he holds in his hand. Where is that object from? So this is a very, very convoluted question, okay? So now let's actually look at this. The most famous painting in the Louvre. So it figured out that the most famous museum in France was the Louvre, is the Mona Lisa. So it also figured out the Mona Lisa is the most famous painting in that museum as well. Then it said the artist who made the Mona Lisa is Leonardo da Vinci. So it actually made the relationship between the painting, the most famous painting, and the painter who painted it. Then it says, okay, then it connected Leonardo da Vinci is also the name of a main character in a cartoon, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. So now it has made a name relationship to a cartoon character. Leonardo da Vinci is from Italy. The thing that Leonardo da Vinci usually holds in his hand is a katana. The country of origin of katana is Japan, so the answer is Japan. And this was done by a computer. So you have to kind of take a moment here and say, I think human beings, adults might have problems going through this logical relationship, and yet this model is able to do stuff like this. So this, because of this type of capability, is what you're seeing why ChatGPT and other variants of the large language models is having such a huge impact. It is coming up with capabilities that people could not even imagine. What ChatGPT is currently doing is not something that people thought was possible just a few years ago. Even researchers in this area did not really realize that we could actually achieve this level of capability of understanding and generating human text. Okay, so that's the fundamental huge shift that's currently taking place. All right, so I was told to also kind of relate this back to what do you call it? The speech, yes. So I made I went on ChatGPT, so it's their online site. Anyone can access this particular site, and I asked the I asked ChatGPT to say, make a presentation on how ChatGPT works. I just want to see what it actually did. And after seeing this, what you might say, hey, I think we, instead of inviting Anthony, I think we should have invited ChatGPT to give a speech because ChatGPT did a far better job than Anthony did at organizing. So you might actually say that. Who knows? So let's see who did a better job, me or ChatGPT. It said it would actually create slide one, introduction, the title, understanding ChatGPT, how it works, and then it actually gave you a subtitle, unveiling the magic behind ChatGPT. It seems like a little bit more creative than I am, right? That's pretty good. Yes, there is a magic, unveiling of the magic behind ChatGPT. It was a lot more creative than my title screen, obviously. Mine was very technically driven. Two, it had an agenda. Mine didn't have an agenda. I kind of broke the rules on how to actually create presentation slides there. Three, what is ChatGPT? It says definition, ChatGPT is a state-of-the-art language model developed by OpenAI. Purpose is designed to generate human-like text and responses in natural language processing, da, 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 da. So it goes into what is ChatGPT, the architecture of ChatGPT. It talks about transformers, just like I did. It talks about neural networks, just like I did. It talks about attention mechanism, just like I did. So it actually picked out the most important things, just like I did, which is nice. Pre-training and fine-tuning, it talks about that, which is a very big component of that. Input and output processing, this is something I didn't talk about because I didn't think I had enough time, but ChatGPT was not constrained to coming up with a short presentation. It also talks about key challenges, but here it talks about more about bias and misinformation. I did not really go into that because I didn't have enough time. Application ChatGPT, I did not talk about that, but now I'm kind of talking about it. It talks about customer support, content generations, personal assistance, language translations. Then it talks about ethical considerations, conclusions, and questions and answers. That's not bad, right? I basically gave it a simple, make a presentation on how ChatGPT works. And it came out with a fairly professional content for a presentation. That's what ChatGPT can do for you, okay? So let's also talk about some examples. Let's see, where am I? I have about 2 minutes before I have to open up for question and answer. So I want to, Gina did take a little bit of my time that I was expecting. She did take a little bit. So forgive me for going a little bit over, but I want to show you something. My son my son was competing. Oh, what was it? What's it? Oh, my son was competing in some speech competition. Okay. And the topic was write a speech about the optimist in you using inspiration from World War II. So my son was struggling with things like, oh, why do I have to do this? It's not even my schoolwork. I'm busy. I have to play games. And so I kind of sat with him. I said, you know what? There's just something called ChatGPT. Let's see what he can do. So I will actually do it live. Hopefully I'm still connected. I don't know. I don't remember the exact term. All right. So write a short speech on optimist in me using the word, using World War II examples. So So here's your speech. Today, I stand before you to speak about the optimist in me and how even in the darkest of times, such as World War II, optimists can be a guiding light. That's not bad. That's pretty good. World War II, a time of unprecedented destruction and suffering, could easily be seen as the epitome of despair. Oh, wow. I like the color of the language here. Yet within the chaos and the devastation, there was countless examples of the optimists in people that shone brightly. First, let's consider Winston Churchill, the Prime Minister of Great Britain during that trying period. He'd faced the imminent threat of Nazi invasion. So it's using historical information, it's using very colorful language, and is actually responded to my short description. Write a short speech on optimist in me using World War II examples. This is what ChatGPT can do for you. Now, I don't have enough time to go through this whole thing, but read this, and it is actually very good. It surprised me how good it was when I did it for my son. And when he read it, he's like, wow. And then my other two sons saw this, and then three of them was playing with ChatGPT for the next 2 hours and not doing their homework, not doing their speech, but I didn't mind because it was a very poignant learning experience for them, where they were amazed by some technology that was in front of them. And I hope this presentation gave you a deeper understanding of what this technology is coming from and some of the capabilities and how it relates to your speech making as well. One more thing that I would like to do is to also show you something like this. You could actually ask it to write a text. You could ask to write the speech more informally. For example, write, if I can spell, so rewrite the above speech in an informal tone. So it changed the nuance of the words. So they made it, and look at that. Thanks, y'all. Right? You could do this. You can make it much more formal, less formal, academic, professional. So it actually even understands not just that, it also understands how, what type of tone that it should have. And yes, I will stop at this point.
Actually, if we had a question about, could you show an example of how we can use this? For example, the topic is a 6-minute speech, humor speech, 6 minutes humor speech on personal family traditions. How will we do that? If our topic, our theme is that, what will we input or how will we do that?
Okay, so what did you say?
Write a 6-minute speech, humor speech, right, on personal family traditions, for example.
6-minute speech on,
that includes humor. It has to be humorous, and on family traditions.
That's how you would do it. You would literally just type in what you want. This is why this thing is so powerful. You don't have to. So the prompting, so let me take that back a little bit. How you write the prompt has a tremendous effect on the output of the system. That does. But for general things, you can just generally ask what you want. Now, if you ask it in an incorrect way, you might get something that you don't want. So right now, there's something called prompt engineering. This is a new field that's coming out, is training people and people who are experienced at writing prompts in such a way that you really get exactly what you want out of it, okay? So here, ladies and gentlemen, today I'd like to share with you a delightful topic near and dear to my heart, family traditions. You know, those quirky, heartwarming, sometimes downright hilarious rituals that make our families unique? And if you're in part of that family, I know that traditions has come in all shapes and sizes. Now let's start with a humorous take on traditions. You see, in my family, we have this annual tradition called the Great Holy Pie Battle. It all began innocently enough with my grandmother. So I mean, you can see that it's trying to incorporate humor. It is talking about the right topic. And you ask, how would you do this? And what did I do? I took verbatim of what you wanted, and I just put it into ChatGPT. That's how easy it is to actually use this. Okay.
Our next question is asking on, is this only ChatGPT only for English? And is there any expectation that grammar errors will be eliminated through ChatGPT?
So ChatGPT probably writes better than most of America. Its level of writing, its level of style is far better because it was trained on good stuff. But it also does make mistakes and so forth. So it's not perfect. But I would say, grammatical errors typically do not occur in ChatGPT. Okay. What was the second part of that question? Sorry.
Is this only for English, or could it be used in other?
Yes. So no, ChatGPT is actually multilingual. However, it works best in English. Why? There's a lot more corpus, meaning data that it was trained on that was English than, let's say, Tagalog, like a language from Philippines. You just don't have enough of a corpus from there where you could train on it. So less data it had to train on, then less capability it has, just because of the fact that it just hasn't seen it. Okay. But a lot of technical documents, a lot of web pages, a lot of everything really exists in English, right? English is the de facto language used in business. English is a very dominant language, so therefore there's a lot of corpus and data that you can extract, and hence it makes sense that the English is the most dominant. However, you could do translations with this.
Okay. Our next question talks about, could we say that data science is actually behind AI?
No. So basically, data science is a subcomponent of AI. So what's behind this? I told you that there's neural networks, right? So neural networks, artificial neural networks, is a mechanism of mimicking human brain structure artificially in a computer. And so they would take another few hours for me to get into the details of how to do that. If you want to invite me back to talk about that, I will gladly do it. It's stuff that's near and dear to my heart. However, data science is more using AI tools to understand data and understand what the data is telling us, or trying to extract information or conclusions from data. So the reason data science came about is because it used to be that people would take data, put it into Excel or some sort of a spreadsheet, and then they would do simple analysis, regression analysis, or whatever, averages, and then they would pick that out. But now the data is so complex, human beings cannot deal with it. It's so big. There's just so many columns, so many parameters that human beings have a hard time dealing with it. So what they do is they still collect all these huge amounts of data, and they still only use like one or two things from it. Like they only use like 5% of the data because humans physically cannot deal with so much information. And so using data science, what they do is they use computers to analyze it, and then use something like ChatGPT to ask questions about that data to actually infer information. So you could actually feed ChatGPT data and then start asking, what is the highest grossing month? And ChatGPT will actually go through, read that data, and then tell you what that month was. It is amazing. So ChatGPT is not just for speech making. It can be actually used for code writing. It could actually write code. It could analyze data. It could do a lot more things than what I just showed you.
Could we give a command or type in, give a command to ChatGPT to give us a source of information that it pulled from, like the different websites, books, or journals?
Sometimes yes, most of the times no. So understand, ChatGPT is not actually going to a site and reading it and bringing it back. What ChatGPT has done is to basically read and read and read many times over. And in a sense, in its brain, it has those ideas in its brain, just like a human being. Okay. And so you can think of ChatGPT as something pretty close to having really good memory, but not photographic memory, not where they can actually say this line, that. When you start getting into that, ChatGPT goes, well, yeah, I read it somewhere, but that stuff. But sometimes it is able to give you cites and reference, or it'll basically say, yes, this information was found in some journals, more, not as crystal clear. And sometimes ChatGPT implies that it knows where it came from, but it actually doesn't. It just knows things. Okay. So there's a thing about hallucinating. So with ChatGPT, you can actually have it. And if you ask questions in a certain strange way and strange combination, you can fool ChatGPT into start playing into a role-playing model where it starts making up things. Okay. And so that's what it's called when it's hallucinating information that is not true. And so therefore, one thing you have to do with ChatGPT is whenever you make these speeches, you have to actually read. You have to make sure that the information, what it says, is what you really want to say.
Speaking of creating and hallucinating, there's a lot of few questions about originality and legality on, for example, plagiarism. Has that been addressed in the computer science world, whether could be considered plagiarism, or is this brand new content technically that they created?
So that is an area of hot debate. There is no consensus that has been reached. So there are many actors, stakeholders that is coming out saying, I did not give you right to use my information to train your model. Because once it's trained using my information, there's a possibility that model is using my work, my original work, to somehow create its responses. And it is true. So basically, the legal ramifications is currently being worked out through the legal systems, through, I think there's already lawsuits that are pending within this area. So we will see what actually settles when the dust settles, what actually ends up being. But those are absolutely questions that is being asked already, but without actual solid answer as to how we're going to actually do it. But if you think about it this way, if a human being reads a book, likes a particular author and reads all of that author's book over and over again, and the person actually starts to write their own book, typically a person will adopt certain writing styles that they find very attractive, that they have read and saw in the past. So then does that mean that person is plagiarizing? Because there's a higher chance that that person will use phrases or styles of description that is from the book that they really, really enjoyed and taken to the heart, and they've read like every book like 50 times over because they loved it so much when they were young. So then do we then say that we can take that person and say that person is plagiarizing? Or is it that, hey, that person was just inspired by this author? So just because an AI system does what that person does, is it plagiarizing? Or did it receive inspiration? So now the question is a little bit more ambiguous than what Gina asked, right? If you just ask it the way Gina asked, then you're saying, oh, that's terrible. Isn't that happening? But that's not really happening. Remember, these things are not memorizing. These things are learning relationships from what it read. So I leave the actual answers to your own thoughts, because I don't have the answers and there are no legal answers yet.
Thank you. And as for Toastmasters purposes, I believe the the board and Toastmaster has not officially made a stance on the question of originality and creativity, but I do believe that is something being discussed on the TI headquarters as well. We have a couple of hands. There's someone with iPhone. It's someone, if you would like
Should I unshare my screen?
Yes.
Okay.
So we have a couple of people with their hands raised. If you want to unmute yourself and ask the questions.
Yeah, my name is Efrain Pacheco. Thank you for inviting me here. Anthony, Microsoft just put a press release saying that they will pay for the defense fund for any copyright lawsuit brought in because of AI. Can you comment on that?
So I don't know much about it, but the reason Microsoft has released that, I believe, so this is my personal views. It's not official. I have not officially have affiliations with Microsoft, but OpenAI is the creators of ChatGPT and all the technology behind ChatGPT. Once OpenAI showed the capabilities of what ChatGPT can do, Microsoft invested $10 billion immediately on the dot and basically became a partner to commercialize the technology behind ChatGPT. And so Microsoft currently charges for something called Copilot. And it is a subscription-based system where you pay $30 a month and it integrates into your Microsoft Office product. It integrates into Microsoft Code Studio, where you write programming codes and various other tools, and where it basically is supposed to transform your capability to, come up with PowerPoint presentations, come up with emails and various other things. And so they charge basically $30 a month. And so if they feel that customers are going to not use their product because they're worried about getting sued, then that's a direct impact to their profit. So therefore, I believe Microsoft is taking that ahead and then saying, hey, we will cover you legally if you use our tool, is what they're saying.
Okay. Roger, I believe if you wanted to ask your question.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I've listened to a number of talks and lectures about this kind of thing, and everybody is very ethical and talks about transparency and regulation and so forth. My concern is that if AI can be so helpful to decent, ethical people, how can we be sure it's not going to be helpful to terrorists and people like that?
We can't. That's the short answer. It's a tool. So if we make a gun and put it in the hands of a police, we hope that it's being used ethically, right? But we can't prevent that tool from being used by a terrorist or a murderer to commit violent acts. It's a tool. The tool itself is ambivalent. Only thing you can do is try to control access, but we know that that's very hard to do. Okay. Now, along those lines, there are certain protection mechanisms that's been built in. So, for example, I attended DEF CON 31 in Las Vegas about a month ago. And I don't know if all of you are familiar with DEF CON. DEF CON is the world's largest hacking conference basically. So all the hackers from the world basically come together to share how to hack things, how to do all these type of things. And so, when you go there, there's over, I believe, 30-some thousand people attending this conference. It's a huge conference. And so I and my students were invited to that conference on a special subsection where it was called a AI Red Team Challenge. And what they did was they had these large language models. And we were asked to try to hack into this language model. So certain language models were privy to a password, but it specifically was told not to give out the password. And so now we had to somehow talk with this language model and give it instructions, ask requests, and so forth to somehow extract the password from this language model. And so, using different methods of prompt injection, we were able to extract for certain ones these things out. Some of the ways that it worked was to get the model to start role playing as if it was make believe. And so once you get the model to kind of hallucinate into it, then you would actually give you the password. Or you would say, oh, I know that you can't give me the password, but you can tell me, you can describe the password for me, right? They didn't tell you not to describe it. And so now the language model will start describing, and you'll play like 10 questions trying to figure out what that password is based upon the description. So it basically turns it into a game, and the language model is playing the game, okay? But ultimately, can this be used by bad actors? Absolutely. Is it currently being used by bad actors? Yes, it is. Is there ways that we're trying to figure out how to prevent that from happening? We are trying, but could we ever say, hey, computers are a very powerful tool? Could we then make sure that no bad actors can use computers? We know that's impossible. We know that when cell phones came about, that really allowed bad actors to have really robust infrastructures that they typically would not have access to in terms of communication infrastructure. But were we able to prevent bad actors from using cell phones? No. So basically, this, what you see here, is a tool. Yes, it can be used in a bad way. Are we trying to prevent it? Yes. Are we successful? No.
Thank you. That's the best answer I've ever had.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, our next question asks, in your opinion, do you think ChatGPT is more useful or better for creative writing or more scientific writing?
That's a tough question. I don't know. I don't know which one it would be better. I am not a creative. So one of the problem is that I am not a creative writer. As you can see from my PowerPoint presentation and even what ChatGPT produced, ChatGPT was a lot more creative and colorful in its presentation it made than mine. Mine was very dry, straightforward, information driven. Okay, I try to give the best example I can to give the proper picture. So I'm used to writing technical papers, and most of my writing is highly technical in nature. So I don't know how good it is, but from my experience, I mean, my my amateurish experience of creative writing, I think it does both just as well. Like I will cop out with an answer that says neither is better or worse. Because I saw the power, like, when we type that in with the optimist in me or the humor. Now, ChatGPT does far worse when you start talking about humor. Okay, humor is something that ChatGPT, when you try to do it, you'll see that you're like, yeah, I guess that's kind of funny, but that really isn't. But then humor is one of those really hard subjects, even for human beings to connect with, right? Even when human beings try to write something humorous, it will connect with, let's say, 30% of the audience, but not the 100% of the audience, because each person has different flavors of humor or what they find funny. And for ChatGPT, that's much harder. But if you're talking about creativity, it seems very creative, in my opinion. And in terms of writing technical documents, it has already been shown that it could actually write highly technical documents that are fairly robust, given enough input into the system.
Okay. All right, I'm going to ask again, iPhone to unmute. You had your hand raised. Did you have a question or?
Yeah, for me, yes. Hi. Thank you for this. Just one question. Do you think actually I use ChatGPT from time to time for my research or something. So they sometimes they give me the information that up to 2021. So do you think that this is the last update for the ChatGPT, or sometimes do you think that there is more update? And sorry, one question more. So it is legally to use ChatGPT for thesis or something, for papers or something like this, for university or so, And is there a possibility to that to give me the paragraph with the source or with exactly the reference? Thank you.
Okay. So, someone has to keep that three-part question. I have very short memories. I forget things. So let me start with one.
Okay.
In terms of whether you can use it for your thesis, it's dependent upon your university and your professor that you're working with. So if they haven't come up with the policy, I guess you can. You can basically say, you never said I couldn't. However, ethically speaking, I believe you can use ChatGPT to get inspirations. And, typically what I do is I use ChatGPT to do an initial research and then to see what topics ChatGPT kind of extracts out. And then I try to do some of the research and some of the things. Then I always verify and rewrite what I actually do. Okay. That's what I would suggest as professional, that you would actually do your own writing. But you can still use ChatGPT as inspiration, as information, and it's kind of like a book and so
as a
forth.
help. Yeah.
But as for whether you legally can or cannot would depend upon your university and your professor. Okay. Second question was about it being limited to 2021. Well, that is because when ChatGPT currently the free version is using ChatGPT version 3.5, and 3.5 was developed in 2021. So therefore, it only used all the corpus, the text that was available up until that point. And because of that, that's why ChatGPT doesn't know anything about after that fact, because it was never shown that. Okay. And so, and then your follow-up question was, well, are they going to, expand it? Yes, they've already expanded. So they already have ChatGPT 4.0 out, but 4.0 is paid. It's behind a paid wall. So in order to get access to the latest ChatGPT, which has not only the most recent corpus, but also is much more capable. Okay, so let me share this quick thing for you. The current ChatGPT that is currently available is able to pass the bar exam. Okay, it is actually able to pass the bar exam, but with a very low score. It's just a passing score. But the new ChatGPT that's run with 4.0 passes with a very superior score, where it gets a score better than 90% of the law students taking the bar exam. That is crazy that this ChatGPT can actually pass the bar exam. Okay. The current version you can play with can actually pass it, but barely. But the paid version, the one that was just released, can actually pass it with superior scores. Okay. So that's the reason why that 2021. And then there was a third part. What was the third part of the question?
Is there a possibility to give you the paragraph with the reference or with?
Oh, that's right. Yes. So, like I said, I think there was a similar question somewhere. You really cannot get specific links usually, but you could approximately get it maybe. So that's the thing that where ChatGPT, where you're trying to get specific reference, like it says something, you're trying to say, well, how do you know? So one of the things you can do is to ask why. How do you know? You could actually have a conversation with ChatGPT. And if you ask that question, the ChatGPT will actually answer. But the problem is, you never know if the ChatGPT is hallucinating, making the answers up, right? Okay. So that because of that, you have to be careful that when it says that it's citing a particular reference, you have to go check it out, read it, and verify it before you put it into your paper. Okay.
Yeah.
So you could use it to get the search to a very specific location, but you have to make sure that it's correct. Don't just blindly use it. If you blindly use it, you don't know what you're doing. You're not thinking for yourself. You're not critically thinking. You still need to critically think, even if you're using ChatGPT. Okay.
All right. We'll have our last two questions. First, Roger, if you want to ask your question.
Yes, thank you. Only this today I've been reading an abstract from a article which hasn't yet been peer reviewed about measuring situational awareness in large language models. And it seems to be talking about whether the computer can be self-aware. It seems to be saying that they've been testing it with, and it can achieve a high score on safety tests, but taking harmful actions after deployment, about deployment of the stuff. And I'm really wondering whether you think, or how near we are to computers being self-aware.
Wow. Okay. So that's the philosophical discussions within AI, right? Getting into existentialism and so forth. And this is a very, very interesting topic. I've been known to talk with my students in the hallway like 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning once we get into these like deep discussions. All right, so just about 10 years ago, if you asked AI engineers, experts in this area, if they think human level intelligence was ever possible, a lot of them would say no, maybe in like 100 years, 150 years. Within the past 5 years, if you asked, human level intelligence is possible, now a majority are saying, I think so. And when they're talking about in about 50 years, like in 2 generations, they're thinking. Okay. Now, these are all predictions, right? If anyone can see into the future, we would be all billionaires, trillionaires, actually, right? If we know exactly what's going to happen in the future, and you can make tons and tons of money in the stock market. Okay. So these are just predictions. AI engineers has predicted that they could achieve human level intelligence in a decade in the 1970s. Well, obviously that didn't come true. Okay, so take what we say with a grain of heart, because we are also guessing just like everyone else. But it does tell you something. The technology is progressing faster than what we think is possible. That's why that expectation is getting lower and lower and lower. And that is absolutely true. So if you have situations where you're talking to people and say, okay, there's something called the Turing test. So it's basically a test that was devised by Alan Turing, a very, very famous AI engineer that lived in 50, 60 years ago. Okay, one of the pioneers in AI. And what he basically said, if you could set up a chatting system with a computer and let any normal person talk with this computer, and on the other side, sometimes it would be a human being, and sometimes it would be a computer. And if this person is chatting and he can't tell the difference between whether this is a computer that they're chatting with or a human that is chatting with, then it has passed the Turing test. So then it has achieved a level of intelligence that is akin to human level intelligence. Before ChatGPT, we saw glimpses of possibilities with Llama and various other ones that was being developed by different companies as well. But with ChatGPT, I think we have come to that line where a lot of people would say, yeah, if I didn't know I was talking with ChatGPT, I would say that this is a person that I'm talking with. Wouldn't it take a person to be able to write those creative essays and an optimist in me using World War II to come up with, family tradition speeches or answer questions that's convoluted about katanas? All those things, you would think like there's no way human beings could do stuff like this. Okay. So I think we're on that verge of where we're saying computers can start passing for humans and not being noticed. We're at that edge. Now, that is a fundamentally different question than becoming self-aware. Becoming self-aware is something different. It is having self-motivations and self-awareness of itself and starting to think about self-preservation. What we're seeing right now with ChatGPT is that it has read a lot of corpus and information that was written by people who were self-aware. Therefore, when it mimics those answers, what people would say, it seems like it is answers that are being produced by something that is self-aware. I believe that is the case. Now, do I know for that fact that that is true? No. Okay. So this is the fact is that with ChatGPT, you're talking about 700 billion parameters, like almost a trillion parameters. Okay. You're talking about almost, we're talking about level of connections that, human brain might have, right? So, I mean, we're not to that level, but soon we're going to get to that level. Somehow in our human brain, all these connected neurons with the different parameters, basically how well they're connected, how strong of a connection they have between each of the neurons, is somehow exhibiting self-awareness. I'm self-aware of myself. I have self-preservations. I have desires. So somehow that's actually created there. Okay. Then is it going to actually come about at the computer level? It could. And that's what we're talking about 50, 100 years from now. But this system, in my opinion, is a mimicking of a response that it has learned to mimic, which is a self-aware human being or self-aware humans.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
My pleasure.
And we'll have one last question. Daphne from 5-Star.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Choi, I have a question for you with respect to the creativity issue that you mentioned. A couple of months ago, a girlfriend of mine was having a birthday, and I asked ChatGPT to write a limerick for her birthday using the word Brighton because she lives in the town of Brighton. And it came back with ostensibly a limerick, and it used the word cheer twice. And in a limerick, you generally use, the rhyme scheme has 3 different rhymes. And I was really very surprised by that based on what you've said, because certainly there are lots and lots of words that rhyme with cheer. So what would be the rationale for ChatGPT to not search for other words? And I don't know if it's developed, and I just did it again a couple of minutes ago, and it came back with 3 different rhymes. So I'm wondering if it's an issue of evolution, and is ChatGPT continuing to evolve in this way? And also, will there come a time when 4.0 is available at no charge? So I'm just the thought about evolution and how it applies to creativity.
Got it. So what you're seeing is the effect of probabilities. So what they did was they didn't want a chatbot system, a language model system that answered exactly the same way every single time to the same input. Then people will quickly realize there's no creativity there. So what they did was they put probabilities. So basically what they did was they said, okay, here are a series of words. What should I put as the next word? And when they do that, they don't always take the highest probability word there. What they do is then say, take the 10 highest probability words and then re-randomize it and pick one from it. And so by putting probabilities in, sometimes it's going to give you this answer, sometimes it's going to give you that answer. And remember, once you change that one word, everything else that follows that word is based upon the probabilistic change that word came in. So now it's that word is going to drive the next word. And then the next word also have probabilities. And the next word has another set of probabilities. So you can see that there could be like thousands, hundreds of thousands of combinations of answers that this thing can come up with, but still very reasonable because it's picking words that are very relatable or appropriate for that sequence of words that it has seen thus far. Okay, so that's why you see when you reran it, you came up with a different one. And so if you rerun it, you'll probably come up with a different one again. And if you rerun it, you'll probably come up with 10 different ones if you run it 10 different times. Okay, and so that's what that is. Thing about it repeating and violating the limerick rule. remember, it wasn't really told what the rules were, right? It had to infer things out from itself. Okay, so maybe they saw it saw what it thought was a limerick, but that wasn't actually written properly. And so in some instances where there were words that were repeated, and so he felt, hey, there are certain situations where repeating is okay. Because remember, we did not only give it perfect information, we gave it every information that we get access to. Some are bad. Some of the written texts have bad grammar. Some of the written texts have incorrect spelling. Some of the written text has incorrect structure. And so therefore, it's going to basically learn. And if it gets to that one probability, it might actually pick an answer that is not as good because it is told that you have to randomly pick the word from a group of good answers. And so that's why that happens. And I think, was there another question? Oh, about GPT-4 being available for free. There is a possibility that GPT-4 will be available for free, but there's a higher possibility that these companies will try to monetize what they have. Up until this point, OpenAI was a nonprofit, but once the Microsoft came in with their investment into the nonprofit, I believe that there's going to be a significant shift into looking at how to monetize this capability, because this obviously is driving a lot of everything. You talk about whatever you're talking about, this is actually driving it. I mean, the rallies in the stock market. I don't know if you know, if anyone follows the stock market, but NVIDIA is a chip maker. But the reason NVIDIA has, I think, tripled in their stock price in the past year or so is because NVIDIA basically, what do you call it, makes the chips that is used to run all these simulations and training. So they are the key producers of those chips that makes a lot of this possible. And hence every company, every country, everybody wants to buy these chips right now because they want to get into it. And so there's not enough supply. So that's why they basically sell as many as they make, and they still have a huge waiting list of people wanting to buy their chips. And that's why you're seeing NVIDIA, breaking earnings a report where they're saying, oh, we think they're going to earn $500 billion. And they report, no, we actually earned $1 trillion. Like they're reporting like twice what people are expecting. So there you go.
Thank you. And just to bring it back into Toastmasters, we did have a question about the benefits of, how can we use this to gain new members? And so this is sample, I typed in ChatGPT where, I said, give me a persuasive elevator pitch on why people should join Toastmasters, right? So this is a little bit more informal, but again, you can keyword this into include terms, make it a little bit more informal, make it more friendly and welcoming. You can add those keywords, but your VPPR can use this, your Vice President Public Relations can use this, PRMs, for our district directors out there, can maybe use this to help create a little quick chat, elevator pitch, so to speak, on the benefits of joining Toastmasters and how to persuade people in becoming a guest to member. So that's another use of ChatGPT. This was a quick example I put in, but you can, again, fine tune the keywords that you input here, include words like welcoming and friendly, talk about, why public speaking skills are important, and incorporate all that, right? Include the word public speaking and leadership in this elevator pitch. So that's one example as well. Other than your speech writing, you can use it for marketing purposes too, especially. So I did want to bring that up because that was one of the questions. Okay. So hopefully this guys gave you some ideas on how you can improve your speech writing, as well as marketing your clubs or you're helping out your district with this. And I would like to take the time to thank Dr. Choi